Imagine being sexually assaulted for more than 10 years with the very person who is supposed to protect you and having no one to tell but hurt silently inside, and to top it all off, you go to jail for trying to protect yourself and others whom you're afraid might fall victim to the same. Such was the case of a 3-year-old girl in the United States who lived to tell her story. On July 28, 2007, police received an anonymous call from a lady about a dying man at an apartment in Rockaway, Queens. They arrived to find the door wide open, and inside is a 55-year-old man on the floor. He is handcuffed, and in his mouth is some piece of towel stuffed and secured with duct tape. So the police go ahead to try CPR. So they check for a pulse, but there was none. He was. At first, the police officers could not determine the cause of death. But when they examined the body in detail, they realized that something was missing. It was his penis. It had been cut off and was nowhere at the crime scene. So they later discovered the identity of the man as Eric Goodrich. There's so much to this story. It's unbelievable and painful at the same time. However, viewer discretion is advised. Eric Goodrich was a prominent Liberian businessman who lived in the expat community of the Staten Island, New York City, where there is this large population of Liberians. He was born and raised in Liberia, then in his early 20s immigrated to the United States with his girl Harris and their 2 boys. So in the early 1980s, he was already a successful businessman running a limousine service, an import and export company, and also a travel agency. So as a couple, Eric and Lucy would go ahead and add 4 more children to the family, 2 of whom appear in this story, Brigitte and Colin. So during their years together, things seem to go on well. Eric's business is booming, he's taking care of his family. On the outside, he seems like a good man, but there seems to be some internal tension, which is noticed by some of the couple's friends and community members. But being an African community, it's kind of taboo to talk about other people's internal wrangles, so they keep it hush-hush. So it reaches a point, Eric is no longer satisfied with his life at home, his family life, so eventually leaves his family for another woman, in the process abandoning Lucy with 6 children, which now Lucy struggles to raise alone. One of the daughters, Brigitte Harris, was born on the 6th of June 1981 in New York. But 2 years later, in 1983, when she was just 2 years old, Lucy left her 6 children and returned to Liberia to attend her grandfather's funeral. Remember, Liberia is in West Africa, so she lives on a laissez-passer, which is a cheaper form of passport. At this point, she doesn't have a green card or citizenship, and despite leaving 6 children behind, she's not allowed to return back to the US. And this results to the 6 children now being moved from one foster home to another. And eventually, they move in with their father and his wife, who is now their stepmom. So Brigitte is now 3 years old, just a child, unaware of what is about to become her reality in years to come. One day her stepmom is at work. It's just her and her 2 brothers plus the father, Eric. Eric takes her into one of the rooms, takes her clothes off, and goes on to sex her. Brigitte is a child. She has no idea how to process what is happening to her right now, but she knows the father is hurting her. So the father tells her that she's being punished for not cleaning her room, which I find to be a bunch of BS. So this is the first time she was molested by this father, and this would go on for years, and it would become more violent. Like, she got punished for the slightest of mistakes, and if she told anyone, they would move to another place and another, and the abuse would go on and on. So life goes on. However, in 1990, Eric takes a temporary job back in Liberia, but this gig extends for several months, so his wife back in the US grows tired of him and files for divorce. Again, the children get sent to live with their Aunt Eric's sister and Grandma Eric's mom in Providence, Rhode Island. With this move, another nightmare was looming for Brigitte. Eric's mom, who was Bridgette's grandma, was described as mean and hateful and didn't have an ounce of love in her. She showed favoritism and treated Brigitte and her siblings like slaves, while her cousins sat around doing nothing. And you'd beat Brigitte and the siblings severely for the slightest thing. On one occasion, someone had forgotten to flush the toilet and left a big turd floating, which Brigitte got the blame for. It is said that the grandmother went berserk. She grabs her by the collar and strips her clothes off while her cousins watched. Brigitte had no idea why she was in trouble. Her grandmother took a stick and beat her so hard it split her skin. You would think that that was not enough. Her grandmother wasn't satisfied with beating and bruising Brigitte. She went on to tell her to bend over, and she poured red pepper sauce into her butt, then continued to cover every part of her split skin in pepper sauce. This abuse continued for the next few years, and in February 1994, at the age of 12, Brigitte and her siblings went back to Liberia with their father and reunited with their birth mother, who had left them back in 1983. So they are meeting their mom at 10 years later. Brigitte was excited to meet her mother, as she believed she would now receive genuine love and acceptance. However, she couldn't have been more wrong, because after about 2 weeks, Brigitte and her siblings began to feel some type of way, like their mom was ignoring them and that she didn't care. While Brigitte was there, she contracts malaria and is in hospital for 2 weeks. Her mother didn't even visit her. She claimed that she had a church revival to attend during that period when Brigitte was sick. So once again, her mother had abandoned her, and Brigitte was again living with relatives. Living in Liberia was a culture shock for her and her siblings. At the time, Liberia was going through a civil war that began in 1989, which through peace negotiations and foreign involvements had led to a ceasefire in 1995, but fighting continued until a peace agreement between the main four factions occurred in August 1996. So the political situation wasn't looking good. Somehow Brigitte's mother had court documents proving her children were American citizens, and they were airlifted back to the US. So Brigitte and her siblings were safe back in the US. However, the following year, which is 1997, Eric took Brigitte back to Liberia, but this time alone. He left her brothers in the US. While there, the abuse got out of control, of which he didn't care, because he knew the nature of how lawless the country was at the time. Even if Brigitte was to report, no action would have been taken. On one occasion, Brigitte tells her mother, Lucy, what Eric, her father, had been doing to her for years. So Lucy decides to tell her pastor that Eric had been molesting their daughter, but nothing was done. This God-fearing man, this pastor, looks the other way, like didn't put much into it, and suddenly becomes unavailable due to his busy pastoral commitments. In another instance, while Brigitte was in Liberia, Eric kept her passport so she couldn't leave the country and refused to return it to her. Brigitte, however, stayed with her father for 1 year in Liberia, and once she turned 18, that was it. One day, when her father was trying to, she defends herself and she says no and fights him off. And then the father had the audacity to ask her what was wrong with her, because she said no to his abuse and was fighting him off. Bruh, that is so mental. Thinking his actions were justified, Brigitte had to endure enough. Given that she was 18, now she was an adult. She was emancipated. This means she also is taking her power back and identity back. She runs off to the US embassy, and there she's given financial assistance to get back to the US. She, however, felt sad that she was leaving her younger sister behind and fearing that Eric could probably molest her too, but she had to go. So once back in the US, Brigitte again bounces around from relative to relative and ends up living in a women's shelter. Eventually, in 2006, 7 years later, Brigitte finally finds a place of her own. She's her own person. Now she's making new friends, as in working as a security guard in JF Kennedy, and is no longer in contact with her father turned abuser Eric. Even with all these positive developments happening in her life, she isn't happy. She was finding it hard to get into a relationship, and suicidal ideations were constantly on her mind. Of course, this was her whole childhood ruined by people close to her. You don't just wake up one day and boom, you're okay. No, it takes time to accept, forget, and heal. However, not long ago, after moving into her apartment, her abuser was back into her life. Yes, Eric was back in the US, which means there was possibilities of the two getting in contact again in one way or another. In the summer of 2007, Eric is back in the US to seek better medical treatment. His health was failing. He calls Brigitte, but she has no interest in talking to him and tells him to leave her number. His other daughter, though, Caroline, who Brigitte also suspects had been abused, allows him to stay with her and her 3 kids, although Brigitte isn't happy with that decision that her father was now living with her sister Caroline. On the other hand, Caroline is trying to convince Brigitte to forgive their father, as he was trying to make amends. So this is where things start to heat up. See how the chain of events unfolds. Brigitte's sister Caroline invites her for a family dinner and tells her father would be there and that he wants to apologize. Brigitte agrees to attend the family dinner. She takes the subway and then a ferry ride to Colin's home in Staten Island. This is the first time Brigitte is seeing Eric in years. She arrives and is immediately angered by what she sees. Eric is bouncing her knees on his leg and is used to do it to her as a child. Not only did she find that disturbing, but her father now wanted to take Colin's daughters back to Liberia. This triggered Brigitte and she was furious. She couldn't let this happen. She loved her nieces and refused to let what happened to her child as a child happen to them. Brigitte and her sisters argued. She didn't trust Eric and couldn't understand why Colin agreed to such a thing. However, in Colin's mind, Eric was an old sick man and didn't believe he would do what he'd done to them when they were growing up. At this point, Brigitte's mind is now flooded with flashbacks of how she had suffered by Eric and other relatives, and she knew Eric had to be stopped. So over the next few weeks, she goes online to research the web for a solution and came across the case of Lorena Bobbitt, a woman who had cut off her husband's penis, claimed he had raped and abused her for years. Brigitte now knew what she had to do to stop Eric. Her research also shows that she looked up the cons of what she was going to do, like what would happen if the father were to get this injury, and it showed that he wouldn't die due to it. She took the necessary steps and ordered the equipment, which is a scalpel. So on Wednesday, the 25th of July, 3 days before she will see her father again, Brigitte set up a camcorder, aims at herself, and starts recording. In the recording, she says, "My name is Brigitte Harris, and this is the story of my life." Well, not the whole thing. It would take too long. Just a summary. Reasons why I am doing what I'm about to do, why I feel I have to do it, why it must be done, why I've waited this long to do it, and so you can judge me, but before you do, get the whole story. That's all I ask. She continues and concludes the recording. A few days later, after this recording, Brigitte invites her father to the apartment. She wanted to talk to him about the years of abuse he put her through. She wanted him to know that what he did to her was not okay as a child. Eric had always tried to convince her that what he was doing was normal, and this is what all fathers do to their daughters. Brigitte told him she remembers the first time he assaulted her. His response was, "How do you even remember what? Remember that when you're only 3 years old?" So Brigitte gets angry, but Eric didn't appear shocked by what she said and didn't deny it. He began to make excuses and was not admitting to what he had done, which was pissing Brigitte off. She eventually told him that she had invited him to her apartment to ask him not to take her nieces to Liberia, that she knew his intention and he needed to stop, and since he wanted to make amends, that was his chance. However, Eric denied ever doing anything wrong. He wanted Brigitte to think she was crazy for saying those things. Brigitte was now enraged and screaming at him, calling him a liar, telling him that he knew what he had done. Brigitte realizes that Eric was not going to change and her nieces were in danger. She was going to stop him one way or another. She was going to take away his weapon, and that weapon was his pen. Brigitte was going to ensure he would never hurt a little girl again. At this time of the confrontation, Eric gets up and takes a step towards Brigitte. Brigitte pulls out her pepper spray and sprays him in the eye. They fought and Eric falls on the floor and somehow passes out. She looks for a way to restrain him and she manages to tie his hands, but notices he was having trouble breathing. She was in total panic, now scrambling for a way to revive him. She splashes water on his face and starts calling his name. Then he walks up and starts screaming. Brigitte doesn't want the commotion to get louder. She gets a towel, stuffs in his mouth, and wraps duct tape around his head to secure him, at the same time leaving a large hole so he could breathe. Brigitte pulls down his. She uses a scissor. At first, when the scissors didn't work, she looked for a scalpel, which she purchased from eBay about a month prior to that day. Eric was proving tough, so to keep him still, she pressed her knee on his windpipe, and one cut was enough. She cut his off. To her surprise, there wasn't much blood, so Brigitte knew that the doctors would try to reattach it if they found it, and she didn't want that to happen. She carries the organ to the stove and turns on the fire, like we do for nyama choma. The organ starts burning, but the smell of burning flesh brings her back to reality. So she turns the stove off and decides to call 911, but hangs up. She looks over at Eric, and according to her, he seemed to have been breathing. She obviously didn't want him to die, and then she leaves the apartment with the burnt organ and her pepper spray. So her next move after this was to go down to the beach and unalive herself. She always loved the beach. However, Brigitte calls 911 operator once again but hangs up before providing the operator with further information. So police and the paramedics arrive at the place. They perform CPR, but it was too late. Eric was pronounced dead at the scene. Upon further inspection, they found that Eric's been cut off. A scalpel was located next to the body, which was determined to be the weapon used. But this was not the cause of Eric's death.
There was never a question about who killed 55-year-old Eric Goodridge inside this Rockaway, Queens apartment in July 2007. His daughter, Brigitte Harris, who was 26 at the time, dialed 911 shortly afterward. The issue was how much time she should serve in prison.
Eric had been gagged with a towel secured with duct tape, exposing his nose and eyes. However, the gagging reflex little by little grabbed the towel at the back of his throat, which cut off the airways to his nostrils, which determines the cause of death was asphyxiation. Two notes were also discovered at the crime scene. One said, "You wrecked my life," and the other said, "I blame myself. Now I know it's not my fault." Once again, 911 dispatchers called Brigitte and informed her that they needed her to come to the police station. She just agreed and told them that she was a block away but didn't show up. Instead, she walked past the police station towards the boardwalk P and threw away the papers. She called her sister to tell her what she had done and that she was about to hand herself over to the police. Colleen told her not to go to the police as she feared she would never see her again. So Colleen immediately stopped what she was doing and went to meet her sister. So when she arrived, Brigitte was in a daze. Colleen immediately called 911 and Brigitte was admitted into Richmond University Medical Center psychiatric ward. Within 36 hours of the murder, Colleen had hired defense attorney Arthur Idala.
She was tortured. She was beaten until she had open wounds, and her family made her get red hot pepper and stick it in the wounds, stick it in every orifice of her body. You know, they say you do the crime, you have to do the time. Unfortunately for Brigitte, it was the other way around. She's been doing time until she did the crime.
She told the world that both she and Brigitte had been victims of a pedophile father who had regularly and repeatedly, raped both of them from a very young age. However, some family members publicly refuted claims of abuse and disowned Brigitte and other family members who communicated with her. Brigitte was in the psych ward for 3 weeks, and after she got out, was placed under arrest. 2 years after her arraignment for second-degree murder, at trial in September 2009, she testified in her own defense, stated that she had researched in the 1993 castration case of John Andler, and argued that her motive for the killing was not revenge, but was to take away her father's weapon, an act of stopping him from taking his grandchildren to Liberia and most likely molesting them. However, prosecutors maintained that Brigitte's action towards her father showed premeditation. On the 30th of September 2009, the jury found her guilty of the lesser included offense of second-degree manslaughter.
A sympathetic jury convicted Harris of manslaughter, but they urged the judge to show leniency given the horrific past they heard on the stand. On Friday, the judge sentenced her to 5 to 15 years. With 27 months already spent behind bars, she'll be eligible for parole in about a year.
One juror reported, "None of us felt that she deserved to get any murder charges, so we decided on second-degree manslaughter." End of quote. Despite receiving letters from 7 of the jurors asking the judge to give her no more jail time, Queen's Supreme Court Judge Arthur Copperman sentenced Brigitte to a maximum of 5 to 15 years in prison. After serving 3 years, she was released on parole on the 30th of August 2012. Since her release, Brigitte has worked with a group known as STEPS that advocates to end family violence. She also works for DoorDash, delivering food on her bike, and volunteered for an organization called Rescuing Leftover Cuisine, where she picks up leftover food from restaurants and bakeries and delivers it to homeless shelters and food pantries around the city. In a letter, Brigitte wrote, "I know second chances don't come easy, and not everyone thinks I should have one. There are family members and friends that no longer speak to me. There are strangers that are scared of me, and in society there's a lot of rejection. I went back and forth with Amazon for a month applying for a job delivering groceries. After I provided recommendations and told them my side of the story, they sent me a letter telling me they could not hire. New York City wouldn't even give me a job picking up garbage and cleaning graffiti during the pandemic. All the rejection is frustrating and discouraging. It feels as though even though I paid my debt to society and did my time, the world continues to punish me. But even if the same happens to you, keep pushing forward. That's what I'm going to do. I'm going to make it happen. I will get my second chance at life, my second chance at happiness, and you can too. If someone abuses you, let go of the guilt. As a child, abuse is so hard to process and understand, but what I want you to know, it is not your fault. Brigitte is now living her life and is working on opening a restaurant, Bridget's Cuisine. Thank you for watching, and if you found this video interesting, don't forget to like the video and subscribe if you haven't yet. If you have any suggestions, you can email me, which my email is in the description box below. See you in the next video.